Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Vaccine Year. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Sunday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, and we're so pleased to welcome as our guest Kate Ford, president of the Santa Barbara Unified School District Board of Education. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy celebration of Valentine's Day at your house.
And so romantic. Happy Valentine's Day, and thanks, Jerry.
Yes, well, you're welcome on behalf of the greeting card industry and the American Chocolate Association.
Right. Hallmark loves us all.
Okay, so look, I'm, as everyone knows, very old and easily confused, but nothing has confused me more, I have to say, in the last 11 months or whatever it is, than the issue of getting kids back into classrooms and schools. And, you know, roller coaster ride doesn't begin to cover it. So I want to start with that, Kate. You know, back on last June 23rd, when we had a different superintendent, there was a plan for hybrids. Then in July, we were leaning toward remote. Then the governor said in July, it has to be remote. Then in August, we had a chance to get a waiver, but passed on that. Then in October, we were just going to be November. Anyway, today, as I understand it, the 13,000 or so students of the Santa Barbara Unified School District are poised to return in some form to classroom on or about February 26th. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. A confused older person. No, elementary is poised to return.
And that would be K through 5 only.
K through 6 in this district.
K through 6, and it would be a hybrid?
Oh, definitely. Okay. We're only, if we're lucky, we're going into phase 3, and phase 3 of return to school is hybrid. And who knows when we'll ever get back to phase 4 and 5, but those are when you're fully back to school. But yes, it's hybrid.
And has our case load per 100,000, which I believe the magic number is 25 out of 100,000 in the county, is that now low enough for us to proceed?
No, we're not low enough yet, but the decline is steady, and that's heartening. But also that's why we're so excited that the public health decided to send our safety plan to the state and say they are ready to open, despite the numbers being around 35, 36, but the numbers are going down. They are ready. They have met every requirement to open. And so we're just waiting that final okay from the state. And that's why the teachers were noticed last week, so that if it all were possible and it all happened the way one envisions it, elementary will open on February 26th or soon thereafter.
And junior high and senior high will continue on remote classes for the foreseeable future, correct?
The foreseeable future, for sure. But I mean, to add to your confusion, one never knows, because honestly, we hear every few days that Governor Newsom is coming out with a different message or a different idea or a different guideline. So as of today, I can tell you for the foreseeable future, junior high and high school stays in hybrid.
All right. Okay, so this raises many questions.
I mean, they stay in distance, sorry.
Distance, yes. So there are a lot of cliches that I would be glad never to hear about it, hear from again, that have come out of the pandemic era. Number one, of course, as a literary figure, you'll appreciate is it was the worst of times. It was the worst of times. But the other one that I really am sick of hearing is you have to build the plane while you're flying the plane, or fly the plane while you're building the plane. But that does, in a way, sum up what you have been going through as a board and as a district, as district leaders since last June, correct?
Oh, for sure. I mean, yes, you know, sayings like that are tired and old, but they're absolutely apt. The roller coaster, that's apt. And so is the worst of times. And so is this one. I think you think about what an educator like I, having, decades of experience, I never experienced anything like this, even with 9/11, which was a terrible time to be a leader, a difficult time to be an educator, as you can well imagine. It doesn't even compare to what the team here, whether it's the board, the teachers, the school staff, the cabinet, or this new superintendent is addressing. So take into account that the experience itself is brand new, and then the fact that the conditions keep changing. I mean, it'd be like building a plane, flying a plane when you're building it and having changing weather.
Right. And serving drinks in the meantime. Now, what about as an elected official? How have you? How would you sort of assess the amount of contact that you've had from constituents, from parents, from others, from teachers, compared to any other situation? Is it constant? Is it off again, on again? Are people really passionate? And how does the community sort of divide on the question of, yeah, let's send them back, or let's wait till everybody's vaccinated?
Well, as you know, I think it's really been heartening. I appreciate the fact that we have a lot of people that are really involved and they want to tell us, they give us lots of feedback. So even as board members consider data, science, consider what the media says, consider what the governor and other governmental agencies say, we really take into account a lot of stakeholder feedback. Now, it's not surprising again that in this community, and it sounds like in many others, there are just polar opposites. And so some people say, don't go back to school till it's 100% proven to be safe and there is zero risk. And other people say, get back to school right away. What is wrong with you? We've got to get these kids back in school. So board members and everyone else, I think, just have to continually try to weigh it to find a path forward. But we've had lots of feedback from people and it's been really helpful. I mean, we have very knowledgeable and passionate members of our community. And although sometimes it's sort of frustrating, it's very real. Why would you ever want people not to be involved or to be blasé about this issue?
And then when you sort of balance out where the community is today, is it, come on, let's get back? Or is it, it's really, let's wait till it's even more safe?
I think that most people honestly are sort of erring on, if it's an error, or at least voting on the side that I feel like I'm on, which is it's safe. I mean, you look at our plans and I suppose there's an opportunity to continue to fine tune, but they're very specific about what schools will do to make them safe. And then I think that right side beside it is get teachers vaccinated. And that's really what we hear is get teachers vaccinated and get them back in school. And so sometimes there are people who think those are very separate, but I tend to see them as parallel issues. And that's why, last week we wrote a letter to the county supervisors and to public health just saying, can't you take a pause? Can't you just help us make everyone feel like the risk is nearly zero and get the teachers vaccinated?
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but just sort of on a personal note, as someone who has followed your political career to the lucratively paid position of school board president that you occupy today, you have been, it seems to me, and I read through all the coverage before we talked, the most conservative about this, or were. Let's be safe. Let's be safe. You were like that in August and October and November and at all these key points. Now, really, I hear you saying that you feel convinced that it is safe to return to classroom, which is, kind of a change. But have the conditions changed? What's changed to account for that attitude?
Well, I'm proud of changing my point of view.
No, believe me, I'm not attacking.
I would say that I've tried really hard to be a knowledgeable board member and now board president, which is following the science. And if And although I know that there are those who still want to think and talk about the fact that we didn't apply for the waiver, we were not ready in October. And we weren't
Not
ready.
ready in the sense that the district didn't have the safety plan in place, or?
Well, no, I think the safety plan was evolving, and it was we could have easily had it be in place, but it was very complicated. And if you remember, we envisioned that there was a possibility that there would be a great need to hire staff, and that was sort of only in its nascence. And then also we had our survey results, which showed that a great majority of teachers did not feel ready to go back, and it was very split in terms of parents. And so that early November start date that we thought about just didn't seem smart. And I just want to say that I know that along with my fellow or sister board members, that all we've been trying to do is stay on top of science and data. And now the science and data shows us, especially with elementary, that the risk is much, much lower. Transmission is much, much lower. And we also have seen that those little kids really have a hard time on distance learning.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm no genius. I'm just responding to what I'm learning.
Yeah. So that's what accounts for the change. Okay. About the vaccinations. Now, I'm a political reporter, so I tend to look through that lens, which is another thing I'd be glad never to hear again. But let's be blunt. The California Teachers Association kind of runs public education in the state of California to a fairly large extent.
It's an influencer, that's for sure.
Say again?
It's an influencer, that's for sure.
It's an influencer. I kind of hear mixed messages coming from the teachers union here. I guess you've negotiated this memorandum of understanding that they have 10 days notice and to be back in the classroom. But I also hear some teachers saying, you know what, I don't feel comfortable if I haven't had a vaccination. It doesn't look like there's any possibility that they're going to be vaccinating teachers. They probably have too many cannabis workers to get to first. But that aside,
started.
How confident are you that teachers are going to go back without a vaccination, and where does it stand about getting them vaccinated?
Well, that's a great question, the second one. The first one, just as a reminder, getting vaccinations is not a condition of employment, and it's not a condition of returning to school. And also, part of the Safe School Plan that we submitted, which was very detailed and comprehensive, does include an agreement from the Santa Barbara Teachers Association and the California School Employees Association group here in town. So those are the folks that we interact with, and that requirement has been met. And if there are teachers who feel for whatever reason that they can't go back, no one can force them to go back. Do I believe that most teachers will return? I do.
If they don't go back, will they lose their job?
No, but they will use some sort of leave.
Okay, all right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being absolute moral certainty, 1 being, who knows, what is your confidence level that this February 26th date is going to hold?
Well, I have a pretty high confidence level. So you want me to go 1 to 10? I'd say 7 or 8. And it's not because of the district. It's because everything changes at the state level. So we're still waiting for that letter from the state public health department that says, yes, we agree with Santa Barbara County Public Health, and we agree with Santa Barbara Unified School District. Go for it. Start. Make it happen. So just given the fact, I don't bet, I don't go to Vegas, so I'm not a betting person, so I'm not going to give it a 10 or a 5. I'm just going to go right in the middle around 7 or 8 and say, I think it's a pretty good bet.
Okay, all right. Um, you and the superintendent had an op-ed piece that got published pretty widely about a week ago, really calling on the governor. Well, really, it was more of a call to action to the community, asking for support and putting pressure on, I guess, elected officials, public health officials, to help you open. Uh, and that really emphasized the vaccinations for teachers, but that's not going to happen, is it?
Vaccinations for teachers? Oh, that's right. We were going to talk about that. I'm not sure it's not going to happen. There's a lot of pressure from every corner of the state to get teachers vaccinated. Will it happen by February 26th? It might get started by then, but that's why I wrote the letter to with Ms. Maldonado to county supervisors and to public health, which was to say, we'll do whatever we can to get teachers vaccinated. We offered our schools as sites. We offered our school nurse personnel as the vaccinators. We have offered to create the priority lists. We have offered to make sure that everything about vaccination for teachers and school staff will happen. And we've just asked for the state or the county to put a pause on the current age-related tiers and just allow us to get the teachers vaccinated. So I'm not sure it won't happen, but I had a deep desire to make my interest known, and that's why I wrote the letter to the county supervisors. And we also wanted to make sure with the op-ed that not only that it was a call to action, but also that there was clarity around the idea that, honestly, Jerry, this isn't all us, that we received a certain amount of criticism. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? But lots of decisions aren't completely in our hands. And that op-ed was also written to clarify that.
Yeah. One of the other issues that you highlighted in there was the issue of equity.
Right.
Noting that I guess students of color and in poverty were struggling even more than kids are as a general cohort with distance learning. But you also got some pushback on that, saying, well, it's communities of color, Blacks, Latinos, and so on, who are also dying of COVID at a higher level. How did you balance those two sides of the equity argument?
Well, I don't think it's two sides. I think it's those are all very alarming facts. But what I'm most concerned with, of course, it's my job to be really concerned about young people and those who are attending our schools, and they are experiencing deep difficulties and challenges. There's a much higher rate of mental health issues now with students, much higher rate of what you would call bad choices because of the fact that they're unsupervised, and also a much lower rate of achievement than we already had, which was problematic as it was. A disproportionate number of D's and F's that came to our attention and came to everyone's attention in late November. I feel like these are all the same issues, is that this society has to address the disproportionality of every negative thing that is happening, including illnesses and deaths, but also kids going to school. And I really feel like aside from the COVID-19 rate of infection and deaths data, that all the data points to our kids who are socially, economically disadvantaged really need to get back to school.
So would it be fair to characterize or to sum up your position as all of these educational and sociocultural economic issues that you just described now outweigh the medical public health risk? There's, as you balance the risk, that's a bigger risk to their long-term health, correct?
Well, I think so, but I don't in any way want to act as if I'm a medical expert. I just feel like I'm looking at, as you said, I'm looking at the educational data and I'm looking at the social emotional data. And that leads me to say that the risk of these kids getting sick and of them transmitting it to teachers in elementary school is much less of a risk than the risk that that distance learning provides.
Um, you were kind enough to be one of the first folks we had on in this pandemic series that we've been running back in, I don't know, May or June or both.
April.
April. And that's right, it was April. And, that was the first time that I had learned about or heard about, learning loss. And you talked about it at that time. What have we learned from a research pedagogic way about learning loss since that time, as kids have been on Zoom and being distance learning for now nearly a year? Is it much worse among the K through 2 cohort? Is it more acceptable for high school students? What can you just kind of sum up what we know about learning loss vis-a-vis the pandemic at this point?
Well, we know that, and I remember our interview very well, that I was very positive and optimistic because I think all of us were so hopeful that this was a very limited kind of an experience and that this pandemic would get under control sometime, at least by the summer. And that, as I remember, I said something like, teachers know how to do this. Teachers know how to help students who are falling behind. And you and I talked a little bit about that, but this has gone on so long that it's, first of all, we've learned that if kindergartners never, ever meet their teacher in person or have interaction with their teacher and classmates beyond, for example, the screen, it's not actually a school experience. It's not. And so that has been so alarming to us. And yes, I think older students or students who can read and write and compute probably do better in front of the screen, but we have just seen so many examples where online learning has given us opportunities, but it's also just a very incomplete kind of education. So the kinds of experiences that we think are really important for young people, and that includes interaction with each other and all of the social aspects of school, have been gone for so many, many months now, that's part of this loss. So, I thought.
Is that a permanent loss? Is that something that will now follow these kids throughout their education and indeed throughout their lives?
Well, let's hope not. I mean, I am ever the optimist and I would hope not, but I do think we have to take some very serious measures to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, first of all, when we go back to school, we have to teach kids about how to be in school again. And so I could see the first few weeks just like almost being the first weeks of school. And also we have to be really, really tight about how we assess students so we know exactly what they can and can't do. And sometimes we've taken a lot of time to do that in education, and now it has to be very compacted, because I'm sure you saw that in the last board meeting, we at least conceptually approved as a board a pandemic learning recovery plan for the summer, which is 6 weeks of summer experience for those students whose needs are the most acute and those students who have suffered the most. And I do think that, the social emotional part is a big part of it, Jerry, because so many students have shared with us their discouragement, their disappointment, their sadness, their isolation. These are all things that are part of learning loss too, to me. And so it's not just about like skill and drill, make sure everyone knows their times tables. This is something very big. And to your point, we can't ignore it and we have to really focus on it.
So are there now new assessment tools specifically about learning loss related to the pandemic? When you say we have to be very tight about our assessment, what does that look like? Are they the same assessment tools that have been used previously, or
They're the same assessment tools, but they'll have to be, perhaps there's an opportunity to have additional staff who are administering those tools so that we know who needs additional help after school right away. I mean, we do have still the spring coming. And so to me, it's not as if we're just going to wait until summer. We should be looking at all the data that we have, but a lot of this data is contingent on having interaction with the kids that's very clear. And I think there are some new tools that are out there. I'm not completely conversant in them, but I'm pretty sure that there are enough ways that we can at least find out how these students are doing and give some remedies.
When will we know, I guess as a community, as a society, whatever, what the real impact of this has been on this demographic cohort? And I'm talking about age specifically here now, that this experience has been, that they've gone through about being online and not being in classrooms. How long will that take to kind of figure out?
I don't know if I can give you a time frame without it sounding sort of disingenuous. I think it will take time, because we'll need to see, first of all, how students who are in high school, how they matriculate and get accepted to and are successful in college. We should follow that data. But we also need to just see, once we at some point get back to standardized testing, to see how our students are doing. And so I think we'll just have to learn sort of as we go. Did they say, flying the plane at the same time you're building it? I just think there's so many things. We're going to have to keep track of the mental health and the stability of students. We're going to have to keep track of student or young people crime. I think there are so many things we'll have to take into account, but it will take a while before we figure out what kind of either damage or what kind of minimal damage has been done. I mean, I must say to you, and you've probably seen it with your own children, kids are very resilient.
My own grandchildren, anyway.
Grandchildren. Well, two
first graders are going through this. So I do see.
I remember that at first we were so worried about, oh my God, how could we ever go back to school? How will kids wear masks? But if you're out in society, you notice that the kids have no problem wearing masks, zero problem. We're not getting pushback and we're getting total compliance. So I do think that although that's an isolated example, it is an example that things might bounce back in a fairly positive way, faster than we think, because human beings are resilient.
Well, as a catastrophic thing.
Yes, I know, doomsday.
Who always tends to look at the worst case.
Yes.
It seems to me that there is at least a probability, not a possibility, measurable, that this experience, the pandemic educational experience, will require a profound transformation in how this group of students is taught going forward. That it is possible, in fact, that there will be, if not pathologies, certainly trauma, mental, emotional, social, that have, as well as learning loss that's been inflicted on them. Is there thinking among the cabinet and the staff that might be the case, or are we just trying to, get the boat landed at this point on the beach?
No, I think everyone is really concerned about that. We do have to land this boat, though, and we have to land it safely.
We have to land the boat while building the plane, I guess.
There you go. Nothing like a mixed metaphor. But I think that everyone, probably agrees that you won't know until they're back to school.
Would
So
you agree?
the point is to get them to school.
Uh, would you agree that the problems that the district and public education throughout California faced before this happened, in terms of racial and socioeconomic differences in learning and education achievement levels, the so-called achievement gap, that this is going to worsen all of those?
Definitely intensifies and exacerbates for sure. For sure. There's no way that it couldn't. These students already have struggled. These students already have had difficulties, and they also face difficulties at home. And without getting too broad, it is not lost on me that these students are suffering in many ways other than just learning loss, as you were referring to, and I'm trying to address, is that, you know, many of their parents have lost their jobs. Many of their parents have lost their homes. Many of their parents and their families are struggling for, you know, the basics of life, including food. And so I totally agree with you that it's everything is worse because of this.
Well, let me ask you about the decline in attendance, because I guess right before school started, the district had lost about 140 students. About a month later, it was at 302. Do you know where that number is now? How many students have been lost?
I still think it's right around 300. I think we have close to, well, at least on the website, it says 13,717 students enrolled. So I think it's been fairly consistent that we lost around 300 students, and I'm not surprised by that. But I am really worried about attendance, because attendance on distance learning is very tough to keep track of, and the state has minimal requirements for attendance keeping. And so just to say that a number is, you know, something interesting, but I'm more concerned about what is behind that number, just in terms of the kids who sign on every day and the kids who are actually engaged or not engaged every day in their classes.
Where did those students go? Where did those 300 students go?
We don't really know. I mean, we certainly, as you've seen, and I'm sure you know, that some students went to private schools, but private schools aren't really an option for most students. But most of the students left the area. This is a very tough area to live when there is an economic downturn.
What about pods, learning pods? Has that gone anywhere? Is that widespread? How successful?
Well, it's hard for me. I have to say I'm not an expert on the learning pods. I know that they exist, and they tend to exist, of course, in more higher socioeconomic areas where parents can afford to either share the responsibility for sort of overseeing and supervising a group of students, maybe their friends. And so learning pods do exist in our town, and I'm glad for that, because I'm sure that that helps provide a support for our teachers. But the schools also have learning pods, and we call them cohorts. So as you know, there are cohorts, and as we go back into hybrid, they'll also be in cohorts, which is where they're in small groups where they stay together all day long and learn together.
And just to close on this issue, there are those who are cynically minded and conspiratorial. I am not among them, who say that the reason that you're really pushing to go back to school before the end is so you don't lose more students who would be overwhelmingly white and more affluent. What do you say to that?
I say that that's awfully conspiratorial thinking. That hasn't come into one conversation I've had. It hasn't come into any board discussion, and I don't think that way. No.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. What are the chances? And we have you on tape now. It's your confidence level is 7 or 8 that we're going back on the February 26th.
Or soon thereafter, yes.
Yes. Okay. Oh, no, already you're hedging. Okay.
Yes, that's true. Already hedging it.
But once they're back, that they're going to stay in a hybrid model. In other words, what would be the criteria for deciding, oh, this isn't, I mean, I have a grandkid who is in a private school, a Catholic school, that was going to school. It's been shut down twice, gone back, so on and so forth. How confident are you that once they go back, they're going to stay back and we're not going to have to shut down and go back to Zoom learning? And would that not be a worse set of circumstances than staying on Zoom altogether?
I'm very confident that they would stay open. Not only are all the measures in place, but with regard to hygiene and safety, but also with regard to contact tracing, quarantining. And I think we've done a great job of, when we find out that someone is sick, that they're notified, that the contacts are traced and notified. I don't think that's an issue. I really think our schools will stay open. So I'd go way up on that one. I'd go into the 9 out of 10 that would stay in. We'd stay in session. And I think you're referring to a high school, right?
Yes, correct.
So a private high school probably has to be very, very careful. And I think that by the time high schools go back, ours will also stay in session.
But that probably won't be till the fall, correct?
I can't say that, Jerry.
Oh, sure you can.
Well, that wouldn't be smart of me to say that, just because.
Okay, that's a different. Okay, before I let you go, and I really appreciate all the time, I do have to ask you about this Sacramento public relations firm, because the district got pretty beat up on the Newsmakers TV about it. You hired for $50,000 a consultant, Nickel Strategies from Sacramento.
Yes.
Which was, try to lowball on the agenda first, but it plans to provide situation analysis and issues management, communication training and capacity building, strategic planning and advising, communication support and crisis communication, and high profile incident assistance. What the hell does that mean?
It means they're a media advisor. And I think it's a totally reasonable expense. I think it's really smart. It was, as I mentioned at the board meeting, it was the result of board members talking about how we have to be so thoughtful, so intelligent, so knowledgeable about how we communicate about every single thing going forward. We have one public information officer. I don't see Cami Barnwell as an official media advisor. And I feel like the board was had in closed session, as part of the supervision and evaluation of the superintendent, had been very clear that we want this to be one of the things that we do best. And this decision to engage Nichols Communication as our partner in this, I think, is smart and also important. This, again, talk about that plane. This is a plane no one's ever built before either, is how to make sure your communications are spot on all the time.
The timing was questioned because it came soon after you got hammered with this new lawsuit about sexual battery and all kinds of other stuff by a former teacher. Is it specifically to deal with communication around lawsuits?
No, not at all. In fact, Superintendent Maldonado and I talked about it in December. We talked about it during the holidays. We talked about what our needs were and just what we would consider a good solution to the need for complete communication. And it is unfortunate, I think, that it's been linked with anything else, especially a personnel issue or a lawsuit, because it's so much more than that for me.
All right. It's widely known, it's no secret, you weren't a big fan of the previous superintendent, and you were very obviously actively involved in hiring someone who I guess in June we can no longer call the new superintendent, Hilda Maldonado. Uh, what's your assessment of how she's done so far?
Oh my gosh, talk about, she's the pilot of this plane that we're building, and she has been amazing. There are things that specifically, if you know me, you'd find, you'd know why I think she's been amazing. First of all, she's a really great communicator, and she also is a collaborator. So in addition to wanting to make sure there's as much information out there as possible and it's accurate and it's transparent, she also is always very open to the feedback of others. She has been responding to members of the community in a way I haven't seen before. She is very responsive to my thoughts and my feelings. And when I contact her, and I'm sure it's the same with other board members, they contact her and say, hey, we've been hearing this, or this is a concern. She's right on it. And I think that's really, really smart. She also has very good instincts. And I think this is essential for a leader. She is proactive. I feel like actually getting the media advisor was being very proactive. And I think she is pushing every one of us in ways that we haven't been pushed before. And that's essential at this time.
Hey, Kate Ford, thanks so much for taking all this time. I mean, you really are a community hero doing this. And I joked about your lucrative salary before, but doing this, and I know you were out there volunteering on the vaccination sites in your spare time and washing windows with your third hand. So we do appreciate it. And also, I think in contrast to my old hometown, San Francisco, where your colleague, the Board of Education president, has been spending most of this time renaming schools. It's become a national laughingstock. They've gotten rid of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and not only that, but Dianne Feinstein too, because I'm not sure why. What do you make of that whole situation?
I am not in support at all of changing school names. And call me old-fashioned or whatever you like. I consider George Washington a hero. I consider Abraham Lincoln one of the greatest presidents ever. I feel very patriotic about these folks. I think Dianne Feinstein was a great and still is a great senator. And I think that it smacks of, I don't know, talk about revisionist history. I know no one's perfect, no one. And yes, they have black marks on their lives too, but it isn't a reason to change the name of the school. I would be completely against it here.
Okay. All right. I'm going to ask you to write an op-ed about that. Thanks for.
Happy to.
All right. Kate Ford, thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your Valentine's Day, and stay well.
You too. Thank you so much, Jerry.